So today, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Max Fang. Max holds a Juris Doctor. He serves as lead researcher for data and cyber programs here at the IU Ostrom workshop, where he contributes to cutting-edge scholarship at the intersection of technology, governance, and institutional design. His research examines the evolving architecture of global technology governance through the integrated lenses of law, international, political, economy, and geopolitics. His work engages a broad portfolio of critical and emerging issues, including artificial intelligence governance, cybersecurity, space technology, ESG, blockchain, semiconductor policy, and internet law. Please join me in welcoming Max Fang. Max, yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Max Fang, and today I'm presenting a very simple but complex question. Is data a common poor resource? Actually, this research question is part of the reasons I become an Ostrom Fellow, because I want to examine whether frontiers has a thing to intertwine with like a conventional research question like natural resource management or commons management. And Ostrom Workshop is a perfect place for me to research this question. And it presented, I presented this question in my published work recently in Texas Intellectual Property Law Journal. And today I'm going to further dig into another aspect of it. So what is data? Is data a common poor resource, or is it not? Does it belong to another category of economic goods? A lot of literatures attempt to generalize a theory to categorize the data as a private goods, as a club goods, as a common poor resource, or as a public goods. However, to some extent, they all fail to categorize it because data is a case. Actually, data as a economic goods is a case-specific research question. It depends on which kind of legal regimes it's subject to. And if data is subject to proprietary data center storages, it's a private goods. And if it's on open web, it's or a law mandates public transparency on it, for example, patents, then it's a public goods, arguably. Or if data is on website, but that website requires membership, then it's club goods. So it's very use case dependent, and data under the Ostrom framework was also widely discussed under the Knowledge Commons framework that integrated the IID framework. But while it tackles the production and management of data as information or knowledge, it does not solve the issue of this very virtual resource as a common poor resource. And here, this research question go back to the very traditional but fundamental question. So, so many legal regimes that applies to data. However, the central is property rights, because all legal regimes, when they are dealing with data, it covers their one of the critical issues to data is ownership. And ownership is a property law concept that contains a bundle of rights. The right to control, right to access, right to storage, right to delete the data, to dispose data, modify it, transfer it, seize it, disclose it. All of them are part of the concept of ownership. So the key inquiry here is, as data is a property law central question, what kind of property govern this every given use case? So back to the question I asked, is data a common pool resource? The first question we have to solve is the subjectivity issue, because a lot of people have a notion that data is a public goods because it can be copy pasted elsewhere without damaging the original data. And therefore, there's no subjectivity. However, I think this notion confused data in storage with data as information, because data in storage is when data are stored in hard drive, in data center, in memory chips as zeros and ones, they are physical. And then the concept of not damaging the original, but duplicate the data comes to this concept and makes data as public good-like idea. However, if data becomes information, then that information, when the information is valuable, because sometimes the information is not valuable in specific case, but when the information is valuable to someone, then data as information cannot belong to a certain economic goods, but depend on specific use case. That's the point of this research, because I argue that AI is one of the use case. So to further distinguish what legal regimes govern data in storage or data as information, generally property law governs data in storage because it's physical. It's data centers, hard drive, it's property as we know. On the other hand, if data becomes information, special property regimes governs it. For example, intellectual property, trade secrets governs corporate data that that's valuable to innovation, to technology a corporate developed and want to commercialize. Privacy governs personal sensitive information that's valuable to individuals. So AI, what about AI? Under AI, I argue data is a common pool resource, but AI is complicated. So I will first address what AI looks like here. AI has two sides, software and hardware. On the software side is about algorithms. It's about AI models. AI companies, developers wants to generate an AI model that's valuable to either to their companies, to society, to consumers. They have to train the AI model. When they are training their AI models, they have to input training data into the algorithms, into the NLP training models, and then the outcome will be the trained model. That's their product. So training data here is the backbone of the AI model, and it is the essence of the software side of AI. On the other hand, corporate data is the hardware side. It's about supply chain. For example, infrastructure, databases, data centers, statistical or research data, data shared with the public, such as patents, or data shared only within the supply chain, such as trade secrets. And each of this type of data raise sustainability concerns because for different reasons, these two types of data are subtractable, exhaustible, can be categorized as a common pool resource, and is subject to mismanagement. So I will first address the software side because it's already been published. The research has already been completed. The title of the article is The Tragedy of the AI Data Commons. And it's all about AI training data. Like I said, both types of the data, either both training data and corporate data, are exhaustible, subtractable. And why it looks like this under the AI use case? Because AI needs great volume of high quality training data. It's not just about the quantity, but the quality. And quantity is about how the volumes, aka how big the storage is, how many data centers you have. That's data in storage. However, it also requires data quality, which is data as information. That's why it's important, because data as information in the AI use case is exhaustible, and actually AI companies really exhausted to some extent. So if we imagine a pie of data as information, the total volume of data as information humanity produces, and now AI companies said it's already exhausted, then it becomes a problem. However, data is being produced every day, new data is being input every day, and while we are typing on ChatGPT, that becomes their new data input. It becomes renewable. Data becomes renewable, not just subtractable. But different legal regimes governs this data. Privacy, intellectual property govern this training data, govern what we input, whether it could be used as training data. And that, it makes the pie smaller. It makes the pie smaller, so we are in a shortage of AI training data right now. This is why it's in shortage right now, because first, like I say, AI is renewable because we humans produce new data every day, but different legal regimes restrict the accessibility of this new data for developers and AI companies. AI companies develop a solution called synthetic data, which means AI models produce data and feed back to its own model training. So AI generated data is synthetic data, and they think it becomes a new source of data input to replace human generated data. Does that solve the problem? No, because scientists already proved that AI models will collapse. There's a tipping point for the use of synthetic data. And when AI models overcome that tipping point, the model will like it had a mental issue, and then it will just collapse. So AI models require real-world human-generated data input. For now, I'm talking about large language models. A lot of scientists are developing small language models. That's a different thing, but that hasn't been commercialized. Even well developed, not well developed right now. So that's out of scope of this research. Like I said, the legal regimes that governs AI training data are eating out the pie. Two major institutions, one is privacy, and another is IP laws, intellectual property laws. And these two are enlarging its applicability and increasing overlap in the AI training context. So Europeans are always the pioneer for regulations. And GDPR is the most representative example for privacy laws. Now they have another law called AI Act, and they have Digital Service Act, a Digital Market Act. So many regimes that governs privacy in EU, and it has spillovers because compliance is global. Every tech companies, when they release their platforms, when they launch their website, they have to comply to EU law whenever an EU subject is utilizing their product, their resources or products. And EU privacy law is very strong. It's autonomous and it's right-based regulations. It perceives privacy as human rights, non-delegable, and therefore data generated from EU subjects are well protected. On the other hand, that also means AI models cannot train. It's hard for them to train on EU data. On the other hand, the United States, we have decentralized, sector-specific privacy regimes, HIPAA, health information, FERPA, education information. We have special GLBA is about financial data. We have states-led privacy act. California is a good example. It's almost like EU. The privacy law in California is very strong. CCPA, CPRA is all in California. But the US took a laissez-faire approach, which means this privacy protection and consumer protection legislations is based on either contract or consumer law or torts. And it's more like an opt-out than opt-in in the EU. So in the EU, the default rule is nobody touches personal data, and subject have to opt in. That's in principle in EU, but that's opposite on on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. Another pillar is IP laws. Copyrights restricted ad companies' access to copyrighted works. So there are so many litigations already in the early stages when OpenAI, when Google trained their AI models, Gemini, on copyrighted works, New York Times, Washington Post sued them for damages. And copyright law also protect databases. It's a thinner protection, but it protects databases in both EU and the US. So copyright law is the very first obstacle ad companies face when they want to train their AI models on even open data on the internet. Trade secret and patents. another two aspects of IP laws. However, there's a trade-off between trade secret and patents, and that links to the project I'm working on right now. There's a continuous project built on this paper, the hardware side, as I mentioned. So trade secrets is a sense to protect data in secrecy. Data has to be stored in secrecy. Information has to be stored in secrecy. Once it's open, it's public, then it's out of the scope for trade secret laws. Patents has an opposite philosophy. Patents encourages disclosures, encourages openness by granting monopoly for profitability. So when a company invented a new patentable products or technology, they patent it and then they can monopolize it. So companies are always in trade-off between whether to keep the information in trade secrets or whether to patent it. But trade secret means data stored in secrecy could be protected and it's encouraged. So that also restricted a company's access to AI training data. So let me repeat it. Current challenges for AI training data is the total amount of high quality data is already in shortage. And different legal regimes that govern different type of data further restrict AI companies' access to training data. So the pie of data as information is being eaten out. And while it's renewable because we are generating new data every day, but it's also subtractable in this sense. It's like a forest. Well, tree grows. Oh, they grows back. But when we when the villagers exploit the forest, then it doesn't make it. So the whole village will collapse because it overconsumed the forestry resources. That's also why I think common pool resource and commons is not just a metaphor in data governance, but it's a real thing, especially in the use case of AI. While it's very use case specific, but it's a big issue right now. And currently there's no perfect solution for it. Yeah, I go through this one. So as we talk through the software side, now I'm going to dig into the hardware side that I'm working on right now. Hardware is about supply chain. It's about a sustainable supply chain. Supply chain is very sophisticated because it involves so many companies with different technologies, different know-hows, different skills on the same production line to coordinate with each other perfectly to make a product. And every segment of the production line, the supply chain, cannot be ignored. every step is important. That's why it's called supply chain, because it's a chain. To understand supply chain, I want to go back to the notion I mentioned, the trade-off between trade secret and patents. Because in the use case of AI, because this is a use case specific research. In the use case of AI, supply chain is about corporate data in the AI companies, in the companies that make those AI data centers, those tech companies that makes chips within the AI data centers, and those companies make equipment for manufacturing those chips in AI data centers. And the trade-off here is intense because, for example, chip manufacturing. Every 2 to 5 years, there's a next generation chips coming out. If tech companies patent its technology, chip manufacturing technology, it will soon be just copycat, and then other competitors will just learn the know-how, learn how to do the new technology, and then outperform the company that patented it. So the benefit patents provide, for example, like 10 years guarantee of monopoly, is useless here because once it's open, 2 to 5 years, the technology is useless. The competitors will always innovate new ones based on open data in patents. So most of the tech companies in AI supply chains especially keep their information, keep their corporate data trade secret. When they keep it as a trade secret, it's proprietary, so it's privately owned. It's private goods. But it has to share the information with the supply chain to make the commercial model works, to manufacture chips, to build up data centers, to in order to release the product, the information will inevitably be shared with other tech company within the supply chain, and those tech companies will sign non-disclosure agreements, so it will not be leaked outside of the supply chain. But tech companies within the same supply chains are also competitors to each other. They are doing vertical and horizontal integration every day. That's why we have so many mergers and acquisitions. We have so many buyouts. We have so many commercial espionage. They are competitors. They even reverse engineer their partners' products. For example, if you're manufacturing chips, and then the companies that make the equipment to make those chips will research how you manufacture the chips, how to fine-tune those equipments, and then they'll make their own manufacturing companies for that. I had to indicate certain companies, but I think it's open knowledge. So For example, TSMC is the largest manufacturers of AI chips right now. But Japan, who is the largest provider of equipment for TSMC, launched a new company called Rapidus, which is the competitor for TSMC. And they do the same products, which is 2nm advanced AI chips. So companies within the supply chains are competitors, like villagers within the village are compete over forestry resources. Competitors within supply chains are competing over corporate data, information. They want to integrate vertically and horizontally. And that makes this use case resemble on the use case on the software side. It's a common pool resource by its definition. It's renewable because every company is innovate by themselves every day. However, it's subtractable. Once it's over-consumed, the supply chain will collapse. Even if the information is not leaked outside, once it's over-integrated, once it's the espionage go too intensive, then the supply chain will just collapse, just like a village. And currently, because it's trade secret, so it depends on corporate norms, customary practices. It depends on rules and customs, trade customs set within those trade partners, aka tech companies in the supply chains. You are an equipment manufacturers in Japan. You have a good cooperative relationship with TSMC. You have kept it for 50, 60 years. It becomes norms. Suddenly, you decided to launch a new company called Raptors and replicate and duplicate the same products that TSMC is manufacturing by either self-innovated or espionage. It becomes news in Taiwan, very large, because TSMC is the lifeline of Taiwan, I would say. So when it happens like this, trust is destroyed within the supply chain between these tech companies. And once trust is destroyed, norms is destroyed, then TSMC will just seek out other trade partners, and then the supply chain will just collapse in the center. Therefore, these are laws that supply chain is subject to, but trade secret is the backbone of it. And then information, data as information, is a common pool of resources on both software side and the hardware side of the AI's use case. And it's not just a metaphor, but it resembles the structure as a traditional physical commons like forest, like grasslands, or village to share. And we should govern it as if it's physical commons. And to govern it, to govern data as information as a common pool resource, we have to encourage legal regimes that govern this data, make analogy to natural resource management. And that's the contribution of my research project right here. Is data a common pool resource? Yes. Is case specific? It's limited to data as information, but it's very valuable, especially to industry, to tech industry, and AI use case prove this. AI use case prove that data as valuable information is a common pool resource, and we have to more concerned about its sustainability because while it's renewable, but it's also subtractable and exhaustible. So I think Ostrom provide a very strong research agenda and contribution to data governance and these property law regimes because of it. And thank you for your listening.
Okay, thank you, Max. We are going to keep the traditional format, student first and then the faculty member. So please.
Thank you, Max, for your presentation. Actually, it was really nice, but I have a question regarding first part of your question.
First part.
First part of your research. I mean, I can see you, but for example, I can understand data as club good, but I cannot understand it as a common pool resource. Let's say I'm using ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. So I pay and I can use it. It's not, I mean, I cannot see how subtractable it is. They can exclude me if I don't pay, and information is right there. How it could be subtractable, you know? I can definitely be excluded, but I cannot subtract the information. And if I just like write something, as you mentioned, I'm providing new information. Information is not going to be subtracted. Really good.
Yeah. So that's why I argue it's very use case specific, use case dependent right here, because the case you mentioned perfectly matches with this. When there's a membership, only subscription only platforms, you subscribe to it, it becomes a club goods. In this case, it's club goods. And in other cases, it becomes other types of goods. And on the supply chain and chaining context, in the supply chain and chaining context for AI, it's common pool resources because subtractability comes from data quality. High quality data is about the information it produces. It's not about the volume of data. So if you copy paste the same data, you copy paste 1 gigabyte in hard drive to another hard drive, that's twice the volume, right? But it doesn't increase the information it produces. And the information it produces is subtractable. In AI training context, we have to train that based on the information data produces. And it's, I would say, every beneficiary for this valuable information, which are protected under different legal regimes, exploit this resource, exploit this information we call a resource. And then once they take it, like we take a fish from a pond, it becomes mine, and then it becomes private goods. And then once it's overexploited, then the pond has no fish. That's my point. Yeah. So I'm an individual protected under privacy law. I take my personal information as my assets. It becomes my own private goods. And companies couldn't utilize those data to train their models. So it's as if I take the fish from the pond.
Okay, so I think that there is a little bit of a confusion of what the public good is here, okay? So essentially, the key defining characteristic of a public good is that if one economic agent is using that public good, this does not affect a simultaneous use of the same unit by other economic agents. So let's start with something that is clear. Ideas or recipes or production technologies, those are clear public goods. I am using a recipe. Mike can be using the same recipe at the same time without any interfering, okay? So the ingredients that we are using for our chocolate cakes are private goods because I cannot use the same ingredients that Mike is using in his cake, but we can be using the awesome recipe from my grandma, and then still is or your, okay? And then it's a pure public good. So ideas, production technologies are clear examples of pure public goods, okay? A public good does not mean that it was not costly to produce. Let me give you examples. It might be very costly for somebody to come up with this new recipe. But once the recipe is available, it's a public good, okay? Because one person using does not interfere with other person using it simultaneously and the same thing, okay? Nuclear deterrence is extremely costly to produce, but it has the feature of a public good. One is when one is provided, is generating nuclear deterrence for Mike, for me, and for everybody in this room, okay? And it's extremely costly to produce, right? So essentially, the characteristic of the good that makes it public is not that it's not costly to produce, and it's this feature that can be simultaneously used by everybody without interference, okay? So for production technologies and for ideas, I think it's 100% clear. I think that many instances of data, they fit that category. A data set, I am running a regression with that data set. Somebody else is collecting, 5 observations from that data set for something different. Another person simultaneously doing something else. In which sense we are interfering each other? Zero interference. We can be simultaneously using that data set. My use of that data set does not interfere in any way the use of another person, okay? Good. So that's the first thing. The second thing is even if you have something like a public good, then you can have governing regimes, property regime, regulations that do not make that thing available to everybody. That's exactly what IP and patents do. So patents says, look, this is a public good. We totally understand that it's a public good, okay? But because we want to retribute those that came up with this recipe, we're going to give them a temporary monopoly. Mm-hmm. But that does not affect the nature of the good. We'll understand that it's a public good, but we decided to legally restrict the use at a cost to encourage the production of those public goods. So you see, I think once you see through those lens, I think that many instances of data fit in something very similar to recipes, production technologies, ideas, and they're pretty close to a pure public good, okay? Now, you may consider instances in which this is violated, okay? But I think they're not that interesting. Let me give you an example, okay? Maybe you have a private picture of you and your family, and you don't want anybody to have access to that, okay? So something like that, but this is very, very far, for example, from what AI companies are trying to do. AI companies, their main points are, hey, I'm using this data, okay? Then to train my algorithm, other companies can be using exactly the same data to train their algorithm, okay? I understand there are legal issues because of IP, copyrights, and so on and so forth, but that doesn't change the nature of the data that they are using. The data still is mainly the public good.
Just to clarify that, so you think even a picture of an individual privately owned and kept is public goods?
So ownership does not define if a good is private or not. A public good can be privately owned and still a public good. So essentially, ownership and nature of the goods are two different things, okay? So in that case, maybe you suspect that it's not a public good because somebody using that picture will negatively affect me. But if that's not the case, yes, somebody, look, a picture can be like a portrait or anything in a museum. I'm enjoying seeing the piece of art, and then she's enjoying at the same time, and Mike is enjoying, and everybody's enjoying at the same time without interference. So what becomes maybe a good that can be clouded is the museum space, but the piece of art is not. And then a picture is the same. We can all be watching the picture at the same time without affecting each other. So that's the key characteristic of a public good. What?
No rivals.
No rivalry, correct. So no rivalry. So there's no rivalry in the consumption of this, which is the key characteristic of a public good.
Wait.
Sorry.
I have an order here. So, to respond.
I have another clarifying question. So, do you think even public goods is privatized, it's still a public goods?
Correct, yes. IP and patents are exactly that. You're not allowing others to use it, but still the recipe is a public good. And that's how the literature has treated these things for decades.
And why do you think, like, watching a picture of an individual doesn't affect another?
So what I said, only in those cases we may be talking about something that is not the public good.
Yeah, so that's why I argued it is very use case dependent. So do you think that this use case is more like a recipe than a picture of an individual?
All that matters are pretty closer to recipes, much more closer to recipes, IP, copyrights than to protecting the private life of a person. No? So it's like that is a little bit of the discussion, but definitely not the cases that New York Times and our newspapers raise against the AI companies. That's about copyright. So nobody doubts that we are talking about the public good. What they are saying is like, I had the legal right to authorize you to use that public good. You don't have the right to use it without my authorization, but that's a different thing.
So you think the economic characteristics of a goods is a presumed before we talk about legal institutions that privatize it or?
Mostly yes.
Okay.
We need to move on, okay? I have Professor McGuinness, Patricia, Jorge, and Professor Jessica. Okay, Professor McGuinness.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on his question. Your use of the term use case specific kind of confusing to me. Okay? Because it seems to me that you had the 10 different potential uses of data up there. I see what you're calling use case specific is really what's defined by the governance regimes, the property regimes, is that it doesn't really matter what the nature of the good is, it can be treated in different ways. Public good can be owned by a private individual and still be public. It can be owned. Owns a tricky sort of word because ownership doesn't necessarily involve all 10 of those things. Okay. And I think what you're trying to say is that there's ownership with respect to this particular aspect of the good. And this is where it gets complicated by saying whether it's an intrinsic part of the good or not, is because if there's 10 different aspects of a good, and each of those involves a different activity, then it's really not one good. It's one good that can be used in 10 different ways. And so it could have 10 different governance regimes or 10 different property regimes involved in it. What the nature of the good is, maybe as sort of so you're talking about use in that particular case, but that doesn't mean everybody has access to delete it or to change it, right? It's the governance sort of regimes. So there's a little inconsistency, I think. If it's use specific, then you can't say it is a public good or a private good, CPR or whatever. It is a public or private good for this regime, within this regime. So I've always had a problem with the nature of goods as being institution independent or governance independent. There are some aspects of it that are use probably the best, but things like who has the right to erase it or change it or alienate it, that's not part of the basic definition of what a good is. And so and I think what you're trying to argue is that the basic definition is based on the use, but you still got 9 other steps for a good to understand the whole process of a good. And the good just doesn't exist by magic. Somebody creates it and someone has rights, maybe have a monopoly because of different sort of rights. That's how an individual can own a public good. Okay. Because you can get a utility connection, so you own the utility, but it's still a public good. Because the utility has to put the money out to bid. You want a subsidy for that. So so what do you really mean by use case? I mean, is it use case? It's public good in all cases, or it could be 10 different types of goods depending on the governance. Because sometimes the governance is very complicated and it's not clearly one of those 4. So could you explain this use case specific concept as you're using it?
Actually, I think that goes back to what makes a private goods. So as we talk about the definition of public goods, I want to raise a question that what makes a private goods? Because if not institutional dependent, there's no private goods at all. Communism is about destroying private goods.
Sure, but that's a governance structure.
Yeah, so
It's a governance structure, and so
that's
but if you look at really what exists in communist systems, there are examples of private property. There are certain things that are private, maybe not legally in the Constitution, but for all intents and purposes, it's private. The dictator can't see everything everybody's doing all the time. Okay, so are some things that are practical. So I still don't. I mean, if it's got 10 different steps in the process between creating the good, using it, and and giving it access, using it, then how can you have private has to be all the way sort of through there? I can't. I just don't understand that. You're requiring too much for the definition of private good, public good. There's a big distinction between whatever this property of the intrinsic nature of the good is in a biophysical sense, and it can be manifested in all kinds of different ways with different combinations of all 10 of those aspects. It makes it, a private good in this sense or whatever. So it's just not that simple. There's not a one-to-one correspondence between the nature of the good and the type of governance structure it's, or the type of entity that exhibits those ownership. So you just have to be careful.
I hate to interrupt, but Patricia, Jorge, and so Jessica, and one comment online.
Okay, thank you. Let's follow the discussion. I want to ask you about this provision dilemma that we discussed with common purpose resources. I mean, who provides this data, as you call it, as CPR? And you put, for instance, forests or other natural resources, which are difficult to provide, and users have to organize in order to provide that. But in that case, I don't know, I think is when there is not this resource, scarcity, probably the market is providing, I don't know. And I think it goes through private goods. Yeah, just like this dilemma question.
So with who is providing the resources in data governance?
Yeah. But when we discuss common pool resources, we have this dilemma, this provision dilemma, who provides it? So in that case, how it works? This is my question.
Yeah, but if it's a natural resources like forest will grow itself. It's the people that make use of forest. If there's no village near to the forest, then there's no problem because forest will grow itself. That's kind of the same logic here, I think. We are producing data every day, but now the ad companies were using it. If there's no ad companies there, we don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
The market is.
Real quickly, well, the data itself, perhaps, or what you can get from the model is not subtractable. Your computing resources are. So that's where you could make the link. In that is say, like, let's say we deploy tomorrow OpenAI in an entire new market that we weren't contemplating. And then everybody decides on the very first day that everybody will go online and you don't have the resources to offload or to throttle some users and make others go faster. Then it's subtractable because the use is subtractable. If everybody uses it at the same time and it doesn't have the resources available to do it, you could say that at least online platforms for LLMs are have that trait that would be difficult to say in terms of the data, because if the data is there, then yes, everybody could use the same recipe, which is like basically prompt engineering. You use the recipe, you paste it, and you want to get standardized results. On the other side, it is a very important point to address, and this happens a lot in healthcare, intended use versus potential use. So there's something that how you would like your users to use your device versus what you can actually do with the device. And if the second one exceeds the first, you have to address that somehow. And the third one is only because you mentioned supply chain and you mentioned TSMC and Japan, et cetera. If you trace it all the way back and you want to make sure that to drive home the not metaphor point is at some point you need lithium. And then you can trace it all the way from extracting, refining, and then you have your whole supply chain. And that would be like something that you could help illustrate that point in a more tangible way.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. I love that you're working through these problems because, so first of all, it brings us back to some of the canonical conversations about the difference between an individual resource and a resource system, which is kind of what Jorge's getting at, right? The infrastructure is very subtractable, right? But the data itself may not exactly be, depending on, right, this next point, which I think, I get the sense that you are kind of building on some conversations that we've had about the extent to which there's the historical and canonical economics approach whereby the goods are conceptually and analytically separable from the institutions governing them, right? And that there's intrinsic characteristics of the goods, right, that you can use to put them in buckets, right, that then you can apply any one of a collection of governance regimes, right, to, and they need not match in any way, shape, or form. Some of the conversations that I recall having with you were about the extent to which, well, we may have these 4 boxes, but Lynn nor anyone else really ever intended for them to be discrete boxes, right? And so that this is really a matter of how subtractable or how rivalrous, or maybe more specifically, how costly is it to restrict somebody from using it, right? And so then I think you might have an interesting, so 2 things. I think the work that you're doing here may have taken that for granted, right? That you recognize that that's the sort of baseline and are pushing it in an interesting direction, which is to say, it is possible that the governance regimes that are overlaid onto particular resources change the costs of excludability, right? And in that way, right, maybe are sort of reducing the separability, between the type of good and the governance regime. That is its own claim. That is going to push back, I think, on what Gustavo says and what is sort of canonically there. But I think is, if I recall correctly, some of the conversation that you and I had about sort of how do I think about this, given that it seems like the things that we think about defining these goods, the cost structure on maintaining those characteristics changes in different goods regimes. Right. Now you have to be really careful because you have to be really specific about which of the resources you're talking about. Data infrastructure are really different in this context, right? But I think that if you are clear that you sort of recognize those debates are inherent, it will allow you to sort of advance the conversation to say there's some usefulness about these buckets, but here's where I want to push on them, and here's how that's manifest in what I'm interested in. And I think that may protect you from Gustavo. Never. No, but I think we're thinking deeply about these things, right? And show that that's the case, that I recognize this is the canonical think about this, right? But I'm kind of pushing against that.
Thank you all. Yeah, it's very valuable. Yeah.
There is a comment in Zoom. I will summarize it, but it's a suggestion, I think. It says that your analysis is missing the question of the verification process. Data are not facts, just representations. So questions of verifications related to the veracity and the reliability of the data itself is a unique characteristic of the data as a source. Consider a new way to describe data as a shared resource. This person suggests common digital resource.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you all.
I first got here in '85. All about what's our
Wait, something that